when I get into my qualifying exam, that is when the shoe is going to drop and they're going to actually realize I'm an idiot and I don't know anything. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Basically Doctors. So today, Anna and I want to have a conversation about qualifying exams, but we haven't decided what about qualifying exams we want to talk about. So Anna, what were you thinking we should talk about?
Well, since qualifying exams are so different in every different program and probably also in different concentrations, I feel like maybe we should just approach talking about how we handled the maybe mental strain of qualifying exam season or QE season as they say, and what sort of things about our preparation from a mentality point of view got us to not only survive our QE but excel, because I feel like those are the things that probably are universal. How do you feel about it?
I agree. And I think we can kind of just start by saying, what is a qualifying exam? Basically, we kind of talked about this in our first episode, but a qualifying exam, no matter what the school you're at, it's the exam that basically turns you into a PhD candidate. It means that the faculty have decided that you qualify to get a PhD.
Isn't that funny? Isn't it
Yeah.
funny that basically your qualifying exam usually happens in your second year, so for all of your first year you literally haven't qualified yet to be a
You're not
PhD
qualified.
candidate. You're not, they're just you're just not qualified. Yeah, I feel like it's this big hoopla. It feels really big at the time because it is
Mhm.
supposed to I think signify a really big shift in your education, right?
Yeah.
Being a PhD candidate is mentally speaking was a big deal for me. Was it a big deal for you? Did you think about it that way?
Yeah, no, it was a huge deal to me because the first 2 years I was like, what if they don't let me finish? What if I'm here for 2 years and they're just like, no, sorry, actually, we don't think that you deserve to ever get a PhD. You're not qualified. Sorry.
I feel yeah, I think that's definitely where the rubber met the road in terms of you can kind of struggle through first year, right? You can, even if you felt like it was really challenging, you can probably still make all of the necessary requirements in your first year. But when the second year comes along and you have to do the qualifying exam, that's really what I don't know. That's it's a big divider. In the same way that they
Yeah.
said that organic chemistry was the end all be all for pre-med students, right?
Hmm.
I don't know if that was the case in your university, but in my university it was if you know whether or not you're going to be able to advance in your pre-med dreams if you can pass OChem, because that was the hardest
Yeah.
class for a lot of pre-med students at the time. So I feel with QE, that was the way that I was approaching it too. It's kind of it's what determines whether or not at least the school thinks you're going to be able to get a PhD, which can be really daunting for a lot of people. It brings a lot of fear and anxiety. The funny thing though is I obviously didn't project a sense of fear the entire time, because that's the way that I cope with fear, is to pretend that I'm not afraid.
We equally made each other more stressed as a result of the way that we handled our stress. I was going absolutely nuts screaming about people stealing my Reese's, and you were like, I'm fine. Everything's
I'm
fine.
so fine.
I'm so fine. Do
I
you
know, we
remember?
should talk. We do really need to talk about that.
I think the interesting thing about qualifying exams is that it's so different depending on which school you go to, because there are some schools that do the standardized written exams in addition to an oral exam. Ours was just an oral exam where we present our research and then have a second half where we are quizzed about anything. But then at UCSF, theirs was they actually had to write their proposal for what they wanted their PhD research to be. So it's almost just like a grant proposal, basically. And then that was it, I'm pretty sure. I don't say that was it in that it was easier. I mean, it wasn't a first half, second half. It was defend your proposal, basically.
But it was still orals in the sense that they had
Yes.
to go there in person in the room
Yes.
and then verbally explain
Yeah.
kind of their idea, which I think that's the biggest part of, that's probably the thing that unites all qualifying exams.
Mm-hmm.
I would think, is that for the most part they are orals. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's worth mentioning, because I think part of the apprehension and fear is for most of our lives how many people have really experienced an oral exam, right? And at
Mhm.
least in the States, most people, we've all our lives prepared for written exams. Whether it's the MCAT or the GRE or the SATs, like these are all completely written exams, which I think is a different ball game because once you have to go into a room and talk to people, then there are other skills that need to come out, right? There are other things that need to
Absolutely.
happen. So, like being able to clearly, somebody can be able to very clearly describe what they're thinking on paper and then in person, like stage fright being an issue or social anxiety being an issue. You're in a room by yourself with people who are more experienced than you, kind of judging you, and that's the whole purpose, is that they're judging you, like that's the environment of a qualifying exam.
Yeah, I totally agree. The other thing about that, you may or may not have the opportunity to choose who the people are that are in that room with you. Like we didn't get to choose our qualifying exam committee, but UCSF they got to choose their qualifying exam committee. What about Yale? What was Yale like?
So some schools actually, like Yale, including Yale and actually NYU as well, you do kind of choose in the sense
Mhm.
that there's always going to be your PI in the room with you. And that kind of brings a different
Oh.
tone to things. And we can talk about this because at UC Davis, which is where Nina and I did our grad studies, our
Mhm.
PI was not one of the people in the room with us. But in Yale and at NYU, and I'm sure at many other schools, your PI is one of the people in the room. However, I think the caveat to that is that they're usually not allowed to sway the jury in any by any means. They're just
Interesting.
there as an observer, and at most they are there to clarify something. But they really like the way that my undergraduate advisor, I think, mentioned how he approached being on his students' qualifying exams is he actually is very like, I just don't say anything. I literally
Do
pretend
you
that I'm not there. But that it doesn't like yes, so that obviously that means that he doesn't really have much of a sway. However, as a student, it's that's another layer that you're juggling now because now you're presenting not only in front of people in the department, you're also presenting in front of your PI and depending on your relationship with your PI and like what your PI's expectations are, that can make things more challenging or it can make things easier. I think to summarize our kind of what is a QE conversation, what's going to be universal in qualifying exams is that it's most likely going to be an oral exam, which is a new exam format to most people by the time they go to grad school. The other thing that unifies the qualifying exam for me is that it is a bunch of people in the room, usually faculty members that are in the department, that are essentially deciding after the exam whether or not you qualify as a PhD candidate. And that in itself just means whether or not they think you have the potential to be an expert in your field, right? If we think about PhDs being essentially something that makes you a leading expert, leading research expert in whatever field you're doing. So for us, that entailed because we were in a chemistry department and research is a big component of our PhD. Our qualifying exam had two parts to it. The first part was describing our own research. We all started research probably some point in our first year on average. So we would have had probably roughly a year's worth of research results to be able to discuss at our qualifying exam. And so that was essentially the first part. We have to effectively communicate what we've been doing in lab so far and how it's contributing to the literature. The second part of our qualifying exam was a general knowledge part where it felt like we were expected to know at a minimum, a bare minimum of chemistry concepts. And that could be Gen Chem related or related to your concentration or your concentration, essentially. So, for instance, in chemistry, Nina and I were organic chemists. So, we
Mhm.
were expected to know a lot of organic chemistry. If you were doing physical chemistry research, you'd probably be expected to know more physical chemistry concepts. So, that was the main difference. Now, in terms of preparation, that meant that Nina and you're essentially almost preparing for two exams because the first part of your QE and the second part of the QE are different presentations, right?
Mhm.
And different questions may arise. In the first part of your QE, you might be asked more questions like why are you doing your research? How, like, that is a really big question of like how your research is impacting the field in general, because as Nina and I discussed in an earlier episode, getting your PhD and doing a PhD means ultimately that you're contributing new information. You're putting new information out there. Okay. So some of the questions you might be asked is like, why is your research even important? In addition to the technical questions of like, are you doing your research rigorously and all of that? And then the second part is more of like a traditional exam, but it's more like you have to do it like in person as opposed to having time to think about it while you're
Mhm.
sitting at a desk. So I'd say, which part was easier for you?
I mean, definitely preparing for my research part. The part,
You
because
think
that part
so?
was known, absolutely. Because for me, the way that I approached preparing for the research part was I just kept asking myself why. Like, well, why did I use this reagent? Why did I choose to run this reaction? Why did I choose to test this way? Why are we doing this? Why? Why does any of this work? What is the mechanism? Etc. And if you just keep asking yourself why, then you usually get down to the nitty gritty, which helps you with the general part of the exam. So then you're like, okay, down to first principles, as we like to call them.
Yeah, like the most foundational, like you have to bring it back to
Yeah.
foundational concepts, right? I think I'm similar to you, is that I think it was easier to do the research part because that's what you're doing day to day essentially in
Mhm.
grad school. And so that's probably the freshest in your mind, and you have this association of physically doing something and also, you know, knowledge that's in your head and why you're doing it. Um, but it is also, I feel like some people would find it challenging because, and I'm not sure if you've experienced this with other students, you get so busy sometimes and you get so caught up in doing your research that it is important to do what Nina is saying, which is ask yourself why, because you can get really tied up and caught up in the day-to-day hustle and bustle of like executing an experiment and not having the time to really think about why you're doing the experiment. And that's something that I feel like you kind of have to always keep in mind throughout grad school to make sure that you're not just like some factory, worker following a protocol, and that you actually question, why am I doing the steps that I'm doing in this specific order? That's not always written down and that's not always self-explanatory. And so you have to kind of do your own soul searching to get there, because during your QE, you might be asked, even very down to the nitty gritty, why did you pick these conditions? Or
Mhm.
why did you do things in this way? Which you may or may not really ask yourself because let's say your PI decided for you, on what you were going to do.
I think this kind of calls back to like, what is even the point of a PhD and what are we supposed to get out of a PhD? What does it mean to be a PhD candidate? You are supposed to learn how to conduct research and do hypothesis driven research and contribute to the field. This kind of calls back to the episode that we were talking about when I was saying, like, I just don't think that many people are actually doing hypothesis driven research because, like you said, you'll get stuck in this, I'm just doing this because I got to do it. And the point of the qualifying exam is to remind you, like, no, you're actually supposed to be thinking about this. You're not just in a factory churning
Yeah,
out
we're not just
results.
paying you for muscle, like
Yeah.
just for your brawn. We're paying you for your brains too, essentially.
Exactly. And if you're just doing things without thinking about it, then like that's not what a PhD is, in my opinion. A PhD candidate is not somebody who goes into the exam and is like, well, I ran all of the reactions that my boss told me that I should run and I got 900 results. I think the important thing to remember about a qualifying exam is that you're trying to show how you think as an academic. You're trying to prove that you think like somebody who's getting a PhD. So ultimately what people are typically testing is the way that you think about problems. It's about thinking critically and designing experiments that answer the questions that you're trying to answer. And I think that if you prepare yourself to be able to field those questions, then at the end of the day, that is the best way to prepare because you have to think about why you're asking those questions and why those the experiments that you come up with are going to answer those questions.
That's true. That's the ultimate goal, is to demonstrate competency in the subject matter. And I would say, I would add on to that and say that it's demonstrating competency isn't always or isn't just about using big words. Like if anybody's listening to this and they're feeling apprehensive about going into an oral qualifying exam because they feel like they need to use the right terms all the time or whatever, like, yes, there's a layer of jargon that you need to understand that's related to your work, and it's going to aid in communication, but it's not about, like, you don't need to know big words to sound smart, if that makes sense, because again, it goes back to know what you're saying and saying what you mean. Like, that's the most important part. You don't have to use big words or technical jargon to do that in most cases. You just need to understand the logic so well that you can repeat it to somebody else. Like, your thought process has to be clear to you, because if it's not clear to you, you're not going to be able to communicate it well to other people. I'm not as daunted about that first part, because if it's about explaining your thought process, ultimately, I think our QE, it was about explaining your thought process, being able to
Mhm.
communicate how you were thinking about something effectively to the qualifying exam panel, right? I felt like that was not a weakness of mine necessarily that I needed to work on, because I feel like self-expression, like, no one has ever accused me of being bad at expressing myself, okay?
Right. Mhm.
Um in fact, my criticism is always like, you express yourself too much.
Mhm.
Maybe express less.
Express
So
less.
I but that's like who I am as a person. And I naturally, I think, am inclined to that. So yeah, I've never been really bad at expressing myself, and as a result, I didn't feel like I just needed to really ask myself those questions. Why am I doing this? And once I knew the answer, I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to practice explaining myself. This was something that you know, came naturally to me, I would say. What I did feel like I needed to do more work on was these, work towards the second part of the exam, which was the general knowledge, because I felt like I'm the kind of person to, number one, I forget things if I'm not actively using them. And number two, I feel like I'm not always the most careful learner, that there are certain periods of time when I was studying for a written exam that I would forget to study a specific topic, or a specific topic, eluded me. And then of course, that part, you could have studied everything else really, really well, but it's whatever is on the exam that you're tested on, right?
Yeah.
I used to find myself in a situation where I felt like I really understood one particular topic, and if I was tested on it, I would totally ace it. But if I forgot another topic, and that topic happened to be the topic that my professor wanted to focus on for the exam, I'm screwed.
You're SOL.
So I feel like that can happen on your QE, because ultimately, like, your committee can ask you anything. And I think that's the really daunting part of the second part, which is that the first part, you can kind of like guide your committee into asking you certain things. You can anticipate what they're going to ask, because it's all stuff that's going to be related to what you're doing. So you can prepare for that. But the second part, at least to me, it was a very general, you had a really wide landscape of knowledge that you kind of needed to cover. And so if your committee happens to ask you something that you were unprepared for, or that you didn't necessarily read up on as well as other topics, you could 100% find yourself in a sticky situation
Mhm.
during your QE. So I felt like I
Yeah.
needed to, like, have a system in place where I did cover all of the material. Um which,
Did you?
and you and I, yeah, I did, because my approach to it, okay, so the difference between Nina and me is that my approach to it, even though I wasn't systematic, I knew that I needed to cover everything. And the other difference is really our outward mentality was different. But ultimately we did very similar things, and I'll say why. I knew that I needed to have, like, covered all of the material. Like, for us, it was knowing basic organic chemistry. Like, we needed to understand the undergrad level stuff. That was my priority, because I was like, if I'm caught in my QE not understanding undergraduate level material, that is going to be a deal breaker.
Yeah.
Okay? That in itself is
Absolutely.
saying I don't know more than a current undergraduate at UC Davis right now. And that's not okay, as somebody who is, in her second year of her PhD. So that to me entailed reading and basically being a master at the at the undergraduate course material, which meant their textbook. So I think you and I both relied really heavily on just like reading through the textbook and making sure we understood every chapter of the textbook or every topic that was covered in the textbook.
I did
Um,
not know that you did that because
I
I did.
did.
I read like the entire textbook. I fell asleep on the textbook in lab at one point.
Yeah, no, I also read the entire textbook because I didn't want to be caught. Like again, it's the chapters thing. I was like, well, I'm not gonna if I don't know if I study everything but chapter 8 and they ask specifically about chapter 8, I'm gonna be really pissed. So I
You're
was
going to
like,
be
I'm
like,
gonna
you
have to
don't
study
understand
everything.
SN2
Right.
reactions.
Exactly.
One thing that I wanted to say that I think is kind of funny is that, yes, I did read the textbook. And actually, people thought that I was stupid for doing that because they're like, why are you reading the textbook right now? You should be doing literally anything else. And I knew that I wanted to focus on the fundamentals of organic chemistry. And actually, reading the textbook helped me so much because while reading the textbook, there were things about sophomore organic chemistry that I had forgotten or I had never really sunk in for me. And so I learned something that directly came up in my qualifying exam that had to do with the reaction that I was running. Okay. And then they asked me to draw the mechanism from sophomore organic chemistry that I had relearned for my qualifying exam. And I was able to pull it out of my hat immediately. Like there was no hesitation. I was like, oh, yeah, no, it's like this. And the mechanism is like this because that's what I was asked. So it was very useful to me to have read the textbook because it allowed me to make these connections between my research and sophomore organic, which is what allowed me to answer their questions correctly. So people will tell you too not to do certain things, but if you want to do it, you should do it because it can help.
I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, hopefully you know what you need better than other people do.
Mm-hmm.
So, like,
Yeah.
I would recommend just staying firm if you need to, and then taking other people's advice with a grain of salt as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the way that you and I went about it was probably different, right? Because also to preemptively prepare for my QE, I knew that teaching was going to be the most beneficial thing to
Mm-hmm.
do. Because if I can teach undergraduates the material, then I know the material. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, in the quarters leading up to my qualifying exam, I specifically asked to teach organic chemistry because that was my concentration. And those were going to be most of the questions that I would be fielding. And then I made an effort to essentially really lesson prep for the discussions and really, you know, I'm not saying that like TAs don't do that. I'm just saying that I put in the extra mile to kind of really, really follow the class because when you're teaching, you can and you're doing research. Sometimes like you can just run on autopilot and you're just doing the bare minimum on the TAing side, and that's fine for most quarters. But for those quarters, I kind of try to make sure that I was really engaged with the material just to give me that extra sense of confidence going into the
Yeah.
exam.
We both did that. We like would hold extra review sessions for the students because
Yeah.
if you think about it, holding a review session where the students are asking you questions about the things that they don't understand in lecture, it's like the second half of our qualifying exam. They are throwing questions we are not anticipating and we are expected to answer them correctly.
Free test prep. Always be looking for a deal. Always when you're in grad school, always just be looking for free stuff. And sometimes the free stuff comes in form of studying. Yeah, and I mean it was a mutually beneficial relationship because obviously we were able to help the students prepare better too. So in that way we were
Mm-hmm.
lucky that we got to teach and we were able to
Mm-hmm.
also train ourselves that way. I think
But
yeah.
I do want to say one thing about that. We very specifically asked to teach organic chemistry. From the moment I started graduate school, I asked to teach organic chemistry. I never taught Gen Chem in grad school because I asked for the positions that I wanted. You can't just let life happen to you. You have to ask for what you want. And so, because we were so proactive, that's why we were put into those positions because we asked for it. And not everybody thinks to ask for it. So, just reminding everybody ask for what you want.
I think Nina did a really good job advocating for herself because she was able to not only, she understood what was going to be required of her during the exam, and then she made sure that she was going to be able to perform well by having everything she needed, whether that was being able to teach the right classes right leading up to the exam so
Mhm.
she'd have more practice. And also, she originally was assigned a qualifying exam room that didn't have like
Oh,
a
yeah.
board for her to write on, which was going to really impede like her ability to describe what she was doing, because everything in our field has to do with being able to draw figures and draw out certain transformations as you're trying to explain things. And she recognized that she was the only person that was assigned a room that did not have a board, and she spoke with somebody about it and said that this was going to be a huge, impedance for her. And then they provided her the board. Like the department like went out and got one and installed one just specifically for her QE. So
Yeah.
if she hadn't done that, if she didn't speak up, no one else was going to do it. Like no one else
Well,
was going to fix that
actually,
problem.
what was really valuable and something that I really, really, really value about my PhD advisor is that he is the biggest advocate for his students. He will do anything for his students if they need it. And he actually was the one. I told him that I was stressed about the fact that it was actually that I only had one board and every other room
Yeah.
had two boards. And like people were telling me, like, oh, that's not going to be good. Like, what are you going to do? Blah, blah, blah. And so they stressed me out. And so I went to him stressed out, and he literally marched downstairs and got me another board in that room. It was all because like people were stressing me out, and the anxious me was like, what am I going to do? And he is the biggest advocate for his students, which like not everybody is blessed with a PI that is like that, but we were very blessed to have somebody like that, at least.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, the part where you spoke up is that you spoke up to your PI. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
true.
Which it was like a low
Yeah.
energy, like that was a low activation barrier for you because of the fact that you and your PI were close, but like
Mm-hmm.
at the same time that if you didn't tell him, he wouldn't have you know
Yeah, he wouldn't have done anything. Yeah.
right.
But
So I do think it has to come first from you at some point, and
mhm.
then like it does like ultimately it can lead to very impactful changes the day of. So I think that's important to keep in mind if you're going into your QE, to make sure that you're set up for success, that you're provided the right materials to give the best presentation that you can give, and don't be afraid to ask for things, as long as it's within like the boundaries of fairness, right, between you and other people taking the exam. I think most places are willing to accommodate.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
forgot about that. I can't believe you remember that.
I did. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
I heard so
That's
much about it.
crazy.
The
I
thing
know that
is,
whiteboard.
when you hear enough about it, you remember it. So teaching, I think, was a great preparation tool in general. I excel better with that kind of learning because, like, sitting down and reading a book has always been really like like the worst way to study for me. I felt like I never really understood or got it from that. I excel from what I understand from Grey's Anatomy. This is the most Christina Yang thing, is I learn best from the Socratic method.
See
And
one, do one, teach one.
um it's really not that. It's like question-based
Oh,
learning.
I'm sorry, but that's what I thought you were gonna say. See one, do one, teach one.
No,
That's how
no, no,
I
no.
learned.
See
See
one,
one,
do
do
one,
one,
teach
teach
one.
one.
Yeah, I think that's also really good. See one, do one, teach one is also like I didn't think about it that way. The Socratic method is more like fielding questions.
Yeah,
Like, and this
absolutely.
is why I'm an argumentative person, because I like, and it's not because I enjoy arguing, it's because like I learn from arguing. And that's something that I've spoken with my partner about as well, where it's like, cuz this person is not somebody who wants to be argumentative, and sometimes I can be perceived as like picking a fight when in reality I'm just trying to like understand the situation better, or I'm trying to gain information. But my way of gaining information is engaging in a debate,
Yeah.
because that's related to the Socratic method. So if you're that kind of learner, figure out what kind of learner you are and then do it. And that's why also learn like teaching was so it was more useful, I think, in covering the material than just sitting down and reading a book. I eventually sat down and read because I got to a point where I couldn't learn anymore by teaching, and at that point cover your bases and kind of do other things. But if I were to pick and choose how I learned the best, it would definitely be like interacting with other people, talking about it, conversing about it, maybe arguing about things to kind of get at the meat of it. Because I won't remember the material if it's in the book, but I will remember the material if I've engaged in a lengthy discussion about
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Which is what we always did. That was the really cool thing about us being friends and in the same lab, in the same field. I highly recommend meeting somebody who you can have these sparring matches where you can argue about your science with, because that's what was so valuable about our relationship for my studying. Because we would just argue with each other about things for an unreasonable amount of time until we got to the right answer, or like ran to somebody to help us decide who was right.
Yeah. And
That's
it's nice
like,
because you and I didn't have a lot of like it was so this is why we're friends, is because that I can fight with you and I feel like there are no hard feelings.
always. Yeah.
it's not like I feel like we walk away from it feeling worse. We actually I think walk away from it feeling better.
Hmm.
Am I right? For the most part.
Yeah.
For the most part.
And the thing, like, I think what's really was fun about like sparring with you is what we've always said about each other is that Anna, she doesn't remember anything. I remember everything, but sometimes I'll remember something, but not know why. But what will happen is I will know the fact. And then I'll be like, Anna, but why?
I think that what is unique about Nina is that she has a great memory, which means that she is somebody who, if she did sit down and read a chapter, she actually does absorb the information in the sense that she reads it at face value and takes it at face value. And she'll be able to regurgitate the information exactly the way that it was taught to her with no
Hmm.
errors because she has a good memory. And so in that way, like the integrity of the information that Nina always has is pretty solid. You know,
Hmm.
she and so I think that's why you studied the way that you did. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you prepared for your QE?
The way that I studied for my qualifying exam, I am psychotic. And so I went and I basically went through all of my notes and I rehashed all of my notes from all of the classes that I took. But what I really needed is I knew that I could pull that information out. It was a matter of whether I would be able to explain why that is. And so that's why what I said before, I had to keep asking myself why, because I knew it to be true. I knew these facts to be true, but I had to get down to the nitty gritty to find out why. And I honestly, quite frankly, was very annoying during my qualifying exam prep because I would
I'm sorry.
no, straight up. I was, because I would go up to all of the older graduate students in the lab and I would be like, what questions were you asked on your qualifying exam? Ask them to me. I want to try to do it. Because I wanted to see if I could show that critical thinking that they obviously showed on their qualifying exam, but off the top of my head. So Anna's mentor, who she worked with very closely, I would bother him every day being like, okay, ask me a question. Ask me a question. And then I would just keep trying to answer the question. I'm getting red because I'm embarrassed about how annoying I am.
I can't wait until he watches this, and I hope he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. She was incredibly. You know what was really annoying is like Nina, me. There were 3 people in the lab that were going to take qualifying exams that year, and so I like the Nina was, as expected due to her type A personality. She was the person who probably brought up studying for her qualifying exam the earliest. Okay, out of
I
everybody.
started
So
November.
and we were all just trying to live our lives, trying to like stave off that feeling of dread, right? Because the way that normal people process it, and I'm just kidding, the way that I processed it at the very least is that I hate putting a deadline on things, because when you put the deadline on something, it now gives me so much anxiety that I can't
Mhm.
execute the things I need to execute. So for me, it was very important to protect my mental. Okay. And
Mhm.
protecting my mental meant not thinking about how quickly the QE was going to come up. Start at a reasonable time to prepare, but do not be conscientiously thinking every day that, oh my God, my QE is coming, my QE is coming, because those things are poison to my process. And Nina would come in to the room every day and she would start basically saying, she'll count down. Like the thing about Nina is that she's a countdowner. Okay? She counts down to things that like I hate counting down. If I know like yeah, if a date is set and stuff, that's great. I'm glad, but I do not need to know how many days Okay. The people with the countdowns on like for Christmas, that is not me. The people for the
Oh,
countdown, like, so Nina counted down to her wedding day. Like, that's the kind of person that she is, at the core of who she is. And that again, poison to my process. Okay. So it was incredibly annoying because it
yes.
was just one of those situations where I'm trying to do things the way that I needed to do them in order to preserve my mental so that I can be prepared. And her process and my process just don't align.
Diametrically opposed.
Opposed. So not only, but
Yeah.
not only is she poisoning my process, I'm in turn poisoning her process because the
Yeah.
way that she'll come in and she'll be like, "Aren't you stressed about this?" I'm stressed about this. I mean, this is inherently stressful. Our QE is in 95.8 days away. And I am sitting there going, I'm not bothered. Why are you bothered? I'm doing fine.
And then I'm like,
Like,
why are you not worried? How are you not? But to be honest, like what I'll
yeah,
say is that like I had such bad imposter syndrome throughout the first like I mean I've kind of always had imposter syndrome. I think everybody has imposter syndrome, but
not
I was
me.
like I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail. I am going to not pass. I She never had imposter syndrome cuz she's arrogant. But no, I was so stressed cuz I had people telling me that I was good. Like my boss told me I was good. The professors who I took classes with told me I was good. I performed well, but I was like, this, when I get into my qualifying exam, that is when the shoe is going to drop and they're going to actually realize I'm an idiot and I don't know anything. And I was like, well, I can't be an idiot and not know anything. I have to know something. I have to know things, which is why I started so early. I was like, I I basically wanted to make sure that if I went into that qualifying exam and I didn't pass, it wasn't for lack of studying because it was just because I wasn't good. And I would be okay with that if I knew that I had put in everything that I could. But I did pass my qualifying exam. So that was nice.
I also you have like, yeah, that's your personal struggle, like, for sure, the imposter syndrome. And I would agree a lot of people have imposter syndrome for sure.
Mhm.
I think that when I say I don't have imposter syndrome, what I mean is that I don't like having things that don't serve me.
She gaslights herself.
Imposter syndrome is not helpful for me. It might make other people work harder. Like, it might make other people overcompensate and like do things better, but for me, it does nothing but bring me down, and I'm not about that in my life, okay? The other thing is, yeah, I inherently have the confidence of looking around me and going, if everybody else can do it, there is no reason I can't. Like,
Yeah.
that's truly how I felt about it. I felt like there were other people years above us that had passed their qualifying exams. I look at them and I go, they were able to do it. I am no different from them. On paper, in general, like, I'm really not. So I that's why I was like not nervous about the qualifying exam, because I knew that if I had done the preparation, if I prepared for it the way that everybody else did, there is no reason why I should fail. So
Yeah. The
that
thing
was a
is,
different
I
mentality.
was stressed because there were people who had not passed, not failed. There's a difference between not passing and failing, and it depends on the institution, but not passing usually just means that you have the opportunity to show yourself in a different way or have retaking the exam, writing an essay, different kinds of things, and it differs at different schools. But there were people who I thought very much deserved to pass that didn't pass, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, but like what if that happens to me? What if I show up on that day and the professors are in a really bad mood and they take it out on me?" Which unfortunately, you have to consider all of the variables. People are not going to do that on purpose, but sometimes you catch somebody on a day that they woke up on the wrong side of the bed.
Yeah,
So,
you're always worried about that, like, 1% probability
mhm.
outcome, which I think is fair. And I mean, I had a little bit of that anxiety too, but I think that for me, I was much like you. I knew that if I had a bad result at my QE, I just didn't want it to be something that I was fully in control of. So not being prepared, for instance, like, I didn't
Yeah.
want to have a bad result or a bad outcome because I wasn't prepared. Because that's something I have full
Mhm.
control over. I can
Yeah.
prepare for this, and I know I can prepare very well for it. My worst enemy going into any exam or going into any obstacle is myself. Like, I always knew
Mhm.
that. So for me, I was like, I'm not like imposter syndrome is not my worst enemy. My worst enemy is I have the capability of passing. Like I said, I looked around at everybody else. I'm no different from anybody else. I should be able to pass this. But if I don't prepare because
Mhm.
I'm, lazy, or if I just become complacent or I become overconfident about my own abilities, if I under prepare, that's on me.
Yeah.
That's something that I've done in the past. I've made those mistakes in the past going into exams, and I know those are the only reasons why I fail. It's not because I'm not
Yeah.
capable of understanding the material, you know? It's just whether or not I was disciplined enough to do it. And so in some ways I'm almost harder on myself because like when I don't succeed at something, my automatic like mentality isn't that I'm bad at it. My
Mhm.
mentality is I didn't work hard enough to succeed at this.
Yeah.
So that's a very those are two different like ways of looking at a situation. You can fail at something and tell yourself, "Oh, I'm inherently just really bad at this and this isn't something that I'm ever going to be good at." Or you can fail at something and tell yourself, "Hey, like you could have done this. You didn't try hard enough. That's a problem. That's your problem." And for
Mhm.
me, I'm very conscientious that it's the latter and not the former.
Yeah. I mean, I think same though. I don't know. I always felt like I could do it. I was just so scared that what if I was wrong?
Okay, so but then do you know you can do it if you feel like you're wrong? Cuz I don't question it. I'm not sitting here going I might not be able to do it. I know I can do it. If the stars align and if I put in the work, I'm going to succeed at this, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I just am more anxious than you are.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say that I was as anxious as you, but also it's another one of those things that like anxiety doesn't serve me. So I
Yeah.
gaslight myself into not being anxious. And that was the constant push and pull with me and Nina is that she would come in
Mhm.
and she would be very forthcoming about her anxiety, which in turn oftentimes like that when somebody's like that, it can really irradiate. Anxiety is contagious, just so everybody knows. So when you come in really anxious, you're going to affect other people. And her anxiety was coming in and I was fighting for my life every day
Mhm.
to not let it come in because anxiety is paralyzing for me. It's not motivating for me and it distracts me from what I need to do. So I'm constantly like I'm not anxious. So she'll be here and she'll be like, "Aren't you anxious about this?" I'm so anxious and I'll be like, "No,
No.
absolutely not."
I knew that there were all of these external factors and I knew that I could do it and I knew that I could prepare and I could do the best that I could. And that was all that I could do because I had no idea what was going to happen when I went into that room. And so I always say when you're preparing for something like this, you just need to make yourself proud. If you're proud of yourself for the way that you approached this, then whatever happens in that room can't touch you because you did the best you could and you can only go from there. So make yourself proud is what I always like to say.
That's awesome advice. That's really, really
Thank
good
you.
advice. Yeah, I mean, because ultimately, you just don't want to let yourself down. And who
Hmm.
knows what the people in the room are going to be like on any given day or what's going to happen. But if you did everything the way that to your standard, that's when it's
Hmm.
all going to be good. And then I guess
Yep.
my advice is just to like really believe in yourself, which is hard to do with people with imposter syndrome. Like I get that. Um, but there is a reason why you're here in the program.
Hmm.
And if you've even gotten to the point where you're doing the qualifying exam, there's a reason for that too, you know? It's even being able to go into a qualifying exam. Most PIs are probably not going to let you even get there without adequate preparation
Hmm.
because they want you to succeed too. And so if your PI is a good PI, they're not going to put you in a situation where you're going into the room and they know you're going to have a bad outcome. You know, they want you to succeed too. So they're going to try and prepare you for that.
Remember that you are talking to experts in their field. Like the academics that are sitting on your panel are experts in their field. And you don't get to sit in a room with experts where their sole attention is on you pretty much at any other point in your career. This is a really cool opportunity to talk to people about your science and have them comment on it in a way where they're trying to help you and trying to learn about your process. And that's really cool.
Yeah, that's an awesome point too. I feel like, it is important, especially as you get closer to your qualifying exam, to find the excitement in it as opposed to the dread. Um, from what I hear from the people that do really well in their qualifying exams, the attitude that they go into is they're so well prepared, they know what they want to say. And then at this point, they're just excited to do it and be able to have this opportunity to converse with other people, like these, people hopefully they respect in their field, about the work that they do. And I think the perfect QE experience is to be able to walk out from your qualifying exam and have new ideas of
Mhm.
what to do, being inspired by those conversations rather than feeling like you're incredibly challenged.
Yeah, I think like this is like an unpopular opinion or feeling, but I had fun during my qualifying exam. I thought it was a really cool opportunity to talk to scientists about my science and like explain why my science was so interesting to me,
Oh,
defend it, all of
yeah,
those
that might be a
things.
little controversial.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, mine was fun, but I had a really good committee.
Mine was really fun too. I mean,
Yeah,
so I think that that's also something to take with a grain of salt. Like we both kind of enjoyed our QEs and we got to a
yeah,
level, but I think that's genuinely how you should try and approach it. Get to a level where you can enjoy it. Because
yeah,
otherwise it's going to feel like a slog and that's
yeah.
no fun.
Well, you know what I want to say actually in context of that is that if your PI suggests to you that you should wait, then you should probably listen because they know better than you do whether you're going to succeed in that room. And it's always in your best interest to listen to the people that are at the same level as the people that are going to be judging you. Because if you think that if you're confident and you believe in yourself, but somebody is telling you, like, hey, I think that you need more results or you need to work harder on this, that, or whatever, you should probably consider that instead of just going forward and doing it.
Yeah, I think that's also really good advice because ultimately you don't have to take your QE at the same time that everybody else does.
Mm-hmm.
There is flexibility built into the program, especially as Nina and I have discussed, like not everybody's routes are going to be the same. There
Mm-hmm.
could be setbacks for any number of reasons, both personal as well as academic, and you need to work with that. You can pass your QE in your third year and still
Yeah.
graduate in your fifth
Fourth
year.
year,
Yeah.
fifth year. Yeah. Like, well,
Like,
I don't know, probably fifth year. Yeah. Why not?
yeah, like it's not gonna be like a make or break. Don't go in unless you really feel ready for it. Is the other thing. Give yourself the opportunity to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take it away by, you know, feeling like you have to do things at a certain time.
Yeah.
That's always impatience is also my worst enemy. So I oftentimes, when I'm confronted with something really, really challenging, this is the analogy that we talked about when we were studying. My initial feeling when I see a cliff is, I literally am like, this is the obstacle. I need to jump off the cliff. I'm going to jump off the cliff. I am
Mm-hmm.
just going to start running and I'm going to jump off the cliff. And another more measured approach would be to actually wait. Okay, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to think about how I'm going to do this. And I'm going to do this in a way that's going to cause the least amount of injury or the least amount of, bad outcomes. Meanwhile, I'm so focused on just getting through the hurdle that I'm doing not as much preparation. And because by the time I was doing my QE, I was self-aware that this is a flaw of mine, I knew that I needed to overcompensate for that flaw by actually taking a breath, not rushing into it, at taking the steps that I need to prepare for it, and then knowing I'm going to work it out at the end of the day. And, yeah, it did work out. I also think there's a level of delusion that I had going into it too, which is just that something that I told myself that delusion can sometimes be helpful. It is helpful for me. So, like, going into it, I knew I was like, there's only going to be one outcome, and it's going to be that I'm passing. Like, and I told myself that. 100%. I was like, I don't
You
care what other
manifested it.
people, I don't care what other people are doing. I don't care that other people may or may not be passing their QEs. Like whatever their situation is, that's not me.
Mhm.
That's not going to be me, you know?
Yeah.
And that helps me with like the mentality. Like that mentality helps me to go into my QE with a confident like expression, because if I'm not confident, I'm poorer at explaining myself. And that
Mhm.
really comes back to when you go to do an oral exam, you have to know what you say what you mean.
Mhm.
Okay?
Yeah.
You
Cuz
can't go in there
Anna
being hesitant. Like
well, no, but Anna also will just like say the first thing that comes out of her mouth. You have to know what you're like because sometimes
yeah,
she would not take the time to stop and actually think about it. She would just be like, "Blah, blah, 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 blah." And
which I
then
did work on. Which I did
she
work on for
did.
my QE.
You
Yeah.
did. Yes, exactly. Whereas
Yeah.
like I would think for too long. I would sit there and be like, do that math meme where it's like
I
doing all the equations in my head.
The thing is, I think you were more easily shaken. I think that you
Oh
weren't
yeah.
the person. In my experience when I was watching you prepare for your QE, I didn't feel like you took too long to think about things. I think that you were especially um, persuadable, if that makes sense. Like if you got the sense from somebody in your QE
That
panel
I was
that
wrong.
you were going about things the wrong way, you'd be
Yeah.
like, wait, no, but listen,
But hear me
you'd
out.
but hear me out. I think you get thrown off a little bit more when other people when you're
Yeah.
questioned, when your
Mhm.
train of thought is questioned, and that's something that you have to work on, which is just like how to
Yeah.
stand firm in what you're thinking because you're right, right? And this comes back to your imposter syndrome. And this is my own
Yeah.
observation of you is that like you have imposter syndrome, so you're particularly sensitive if somebody, especially if they're higher rank than you or higher education level than you, if they start questioning you, you're like, even though you know the answer, you're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, wait. Fuck. What if I don't?" You know?
Yeah, let me go fact check that. And then I'll be like, dang it, I was right. Why didn't I stand my ground?
Right.
Like, yeah.
And whereas for me, I think I'm less swayed by other
Yeah.
people telling me that I'm going about things the wrong way, in the sense that I'm calmer about it.
Yeah.
I'll be like, "Yeah, maybe so, but this is how I'm approaching it."
The presentation component is so important throughout the rest of your career.
Yeah.
You have to be able to explain your research in a way that other people understand the importance, that other people understand why you were pursuing the research that you were, and in a way that sells it, that tells a story. And this is actually something that is really important to the job that I'm in right now. And in fact, I was talking to my boss a couple of days ago and I asked him straight up, I was like, "Can I ask you, like, why did you hire me?" Like I straight up asked him that. And one of the reasons that he said was actually the way that I described my research that I did in my PhD and my postdoc to somebody who does not have a background in organic chemistry. He has a PhD in a completely different subject. And I explained to him what I did. Like I gave my elevator pitch that I've been working on for literally 6 years now. And that's such a critical part of your life is to be able to describe what you're doing in a way that tells people how important it is and shows that you know what you're talking about, right? Like I would always tell people like you need to come up with a story of what your research is and why you're doing it and sell it to them. It's all marketing, man. If you can market yourself, you can go far.
Feel like for me, confidence is such a sticking point when you're getting other people to listen to you, you know? Um some people might say that confidence is like arrogance, or it's a flaw, but in the presentation setting, it's actually part of the effect, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. You need to understand that confidence is part of the effect, because if you're not confident, you are muddling the message. You know,
Mhm.
you do not need to be
Exactly.
overconfident, but if you're not confident enough, you are actually getting in the way of what you're trying to say. And that's actually going to be very damning, even if what you're saying is right. Think about that.
Right.
Like, even if what you're saying is factually right, if the delivery isn't nailed, it will not come across that way.
Well, and the other thing about that, if people see doubt and people can sense doubt, if they sense doubt, they will start to question everything that you're saying. And that's how you end up in what we always called rabbit holes, because you would just kind of start circling this rabbit hole of, okay, well, I doubt you right now because you're doubting yourself. So now I'm doubting what you said 5 minutes ago. Let's go back to that and let's talk about what we might think is wrong about this. Right.
Absolutely. I think my boyfriend calls it the like a death shark. Death shark. I need to look up what the actual term is, but it's when like dead sharks or fighting sharks just like hook onto one another and they just start doing death rolls
Oh
in the
my
water.
God.
Yeah, yeah. I forgot the
Okay.
actual term, but that's something that
Uh-huh.
was told to me a lot because that is what I do. It's because I am very much so shark like
Hmm.
in my confidence and in my presence, and then like the way that I'll like spiral to my death with the
Yeah.
same level of confidence is staggering. It's
That's
staggering.
so funny. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah, I think that like what I think was most valuable to me when I was preparing for my qualifying exam is talking to people who had already done it before. And I always crowdsource opinions. I crowdsource what everyone else thinks about things and then I draw my own conclusion from that. I do my own research, if you will. And I think that's really valuable because these people have been through it. So I will ask people and then I will take into consideration what they've done and then apply that to my studying or my preparation. I will also ask professors. I met with all of my qualifying exam committee and I asked them like, okay, well, what are your expectations? Because if you can go in knowing people's expectations and knowing what you need to meet effectively, then you are going to do better.
Yeah, no, I think that Nina's a really good example again of like doing your research. This is something that I've always struggled with when it comes to problem solving. I'm a very instinctual problem solver.
Yeah.
So I'm very internal. I always do when I'm confronted with a problem, I always think I make a plan in my head by myself on how to do it. And something
Mhm.
that I've always really liked about Nina's strategy is that she doesn't rely on herself. She's very like, I'm going to rely on all everybody around me and then form a plan later after I get all of the
Right.
information.
Well, I will
So
form my own plan based on crowdsourcing and whether or not I agree,
so you don't like, here's the
right?
thing, I immediately have a plan when I'm confronted with a problem.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And then
Yeah.
I'm actually like kind of like, okay, my plan seems cool.
My plan
Um
seems cool. Yeah.
but I think Nina, yeah, she might have some idea of how she would go about it, but she has the patience and the perseverance of like crowdsourcing before she really commits to an idea, which I really,
Yeah.
really like. And I think that the moral of my story and our QE together is that like whatever method you have to prepare for an exam of this type, figure that method out, figure out what kind of learner you are. And then in my case, I was so fortunate to have someone like Nina in the lab who was going through the same thing with me, because not only did I prepare very well for myself, I at a certain point decided there's no harm in practicing what Nina's doing. You know, it's why I started doing the textbook, because I was like,
Wow.
you know, this is not the way that I would prepare for the exam, but this is the way that she's preparing for it. And what's the harm in doing both? So I
Yeah.
prepared the way that I wanted to, and I added stuff that Nina was doing too, because I knew that it was
Mhm.
only going to serve me.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was ultimately what made my QE experience so successful, is because I approached it from all of these different directions. Like, yeah, I wasn't
Yeah.
outwardly saying, "Hey, Nina, I'm going to do things your way," but I observed and I did. And this worked well because Nina and I are so different. We would do completely different things. So if I
Yeah.
did things both my way and her way, I really covered my bases, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And I don't know if you felt the same way about like my approach. I don't think you really integrated anything that I did into your process, but I wonder if I affected you at
You
all in the
didn't
way
tell
that
me
you.
what you were doing. What I appreciated about you during our time is that what I would do is I would make the graduate students ask me questions or I would like find a question on my own and then we would spar. That's what we would do. I would force you to talk about it with me. I'd be like, okay,
The
why?
sparring helped me
Why
too.
is it like
Yeah.
this?
Yeah,
Like, and we
absolutely.
would talk about it until we like figured out the answer. And so that was what was useful for me. So every time I would be stressed, I would go run and talk to her because I would be like, okay, I can't figure out this problem, or I think this is the answer, but I'm not sure if
Yeah.
I'm right. Like,
Yeah.
let's talk about it. Why?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
like, we like to say we're two brain cells that when you put us together, we form one coherent
thought. No, it's true. Well, but the thing is, I didn't feel like I needed to tell you what I was doing because I was doing so like you could see everything I was doing. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't hiding anything from you in terms of like
Yeah.
what I was doing. I will say this, Nina took her QE before me, so I did have a little bit more time to study.
Like a
Um
week before.
yeah, but but I would say like I didn't have a secretive process. I figured you could see the way that I was doing it, and I
Mhm.
don't think I was doing anything that you weren't doing, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. The only thing that I was doing that you weren't doing is like protecting my brain more. Like I
Yes.
wasn't breaking down. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? The same way that you did when while she,
Spiraling.
in the peak of preparing for her QE, Nina at this point has been at it a few weeks. She's getting closer and closer with each day to the date of her qualifying exam. And to kind of console herself during this really stressful time, Nina and I had a habit of going out and during lunch to essentially get ourselves a chocolate of some kind.
Reese's and Diet Coke.
Nina's a huge Reese's person, and so we would always come back. And I got the Hershey's. I think I would either go for Hershey's or Reese's,
Hershey's with
and then
almond.
yeah, Hershey's with almond, and we would go back into the break room and just decompress that way. Okay. We were doing this so often that to save money, I'm sure Nina purchased like a bigger bag of Reese's one day,
No,
or
I
no,
got it for my
or
birthday.
she got a Reese's bar for her birthday. This is that
No, I
means
got
this
a
is
six
shortly.
pack.
She had this must have been shortly before her QE because her birthday's at the end of January, and
Mhm.
she eats one. She had a six pack. She leaves the rest in her cubby, which is open to everybody else in the break room. But she trusts that no one is going to take it because this has not been a problem before. And then one day it's chocolate time in our schedule, and we go into the break room. We're ready to sit down. It's, I'm sure she's stressed still for over something, and she goes over to her cubby. Would you like to continue?
Dude, this makes me lose sleep. I went to my cubby and this person, I don't know who it was. We had a break room bandit. At this time, they took my last Reese's out of my six pack, left the six pack packaging in my cubby empty. It was empty. They ate my last Reese's and I fucking lost my mind. It was like a week before my qualifying exam, and that was the same day I did yoga. And I then woke up with a pinched nerve in my neck because I went to yoga with my aunt and my cousin because they were in Davis at the time. And then I told them and I was so upset. And then I pinched a nerve in my neck the next day.
So I'm glad we covered this.
So moral of the story is that going into your qualifying exam, you should make sure you understand what is expected of you. Know what you need to do to be able to reach those expectations, either by looking inward or crowdsourcing information and figuring out from there. Find the gaps in your knowledge, in your general knowledge. Stay curious. Ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing. And at the end of the day, just make yourself proud and do the best you can. And whatever will be, will be.
And have fun.
And have fun.
That sounds great.
Anyway, thank you, everybody, for listening to today's podcast. Hopefully, we were able to help in some way, shape, or form prepare you for your qualifying exam. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we just stood on our soapbox talking about how much fun we had. To be fair, not everybody has a good experience, but hopefully, you do.
Listen, we know qualifying exam season is always a stressful season. I hope that we provided a nice format or a low stress format for you to kind of think about it and talk about it in a safe space. Bring up some questions that may be good for you to ask people in your department, for instance, if you're preparing for your qualifying exam. Because I know that sometimes when you get too anxious, you don't even want to think about it. And that's always a possibility. Hopefully we gave you an excuse to think a little bit about it in an easy kind of ease you in kind of way, beginning of the year kind of way, so that you are ultimately prepared and you go in with the right mentality. I think that's ultimately what we want to project. So yeah.
If anyone has any specific questions about qualifying exams, please feel free to reach out and we can do little snippets of answering the questions on, Instagram, TikTok, whatever.
Send us your questions. Absolutely.
Send us any questions and we are happy to answer them. This is just kind of a general how we approach qualifying exams, but definitely would be happy to answer any questions that come to us as well. We'll see you next time on Basically Doctors. Ding.